The IPCC brought out a special report on extreme events and disasters, and we came up with a number of findings. Two very significant ones were the fact that heat waves are on the increase, and so are extreme precipitation events. And we also made projections for the future, in which we clearly came up with the conclusion that both of these will increase in frequency and intensity all around the world. In the case of heat waves, we estimated that those heat waves which currently take place once in 20 years could take place by the end of the century once in 2 years if we don't do anything about dealing with the problem of climate change. So these are extremely important findings, and I think the world has to realize that climate change does not imply a smooth and steady increase in temperatures merely, that it really results in a disruption of the climate system, which could bring about an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme events. Since these extreme events are going to grow in frequency and intensity, it's important that society equip itself with the means, the institutional capacity, and the measures by which we can deal with them in the future. In other words, we'll have to build in adaptation strategies by which we can deal with these effectively, such that loss of life and property can be minimized. And there are a large number of so-called low regrets or no regrets measures that we can adopt very quickly. One of them is setting up early warning systems. That can make an enormous difference. We've seen that in the case of several cyclones, and in the report that I referred to, there are a large number of case studies that we have provided. There was, for instance, in 2003, a major heat wave in Europe, which everyone remembers, and that led to a large number of deaths as a result. But a heat wave of more or less similar intensity took place in 2006. But by then, most of Europe was well prepared, and as a result, loss of life was really minimized. So I think what we need to do is to set up early warning systems. We've got to set up institutional capabilities by which there is a quick and effective response to any of these events. And of course, much of that has to take place in anticipation on the basis of prediction of these events, but a great deal will have to be done once the event actually takes place. So I think society essentially has to be sensitized to this reality, and we need to strengthen local governments, local institutional mechanisms by which we can minimize the negative impacts of these events. I personally think that we need to get communities to organize themselves and treat this opportunity and this threat very seriously, because it's only when you set up institutional mechanisms, you lay down some rules of the game, that in the event of some calamity, some catastrophe occurring, you're able to gear yourself up to dealing with it effectively ahead of time. And I think that's one reason why perhaps we need to strengthen local governments. But it doesn't have to be confined only to governments. Businesses, civil society, academic and research institutions can all be part of the solution. As a matter of fact, if we want to come up with a comprehensive and efficient way of dealing with some of these challenges, then you really have to engage all stakeholders. So it's not only a question of strengthening local governance, but also extending the scope of how local government can really involve all stakeholders. And that, to my mind, is a very exciting opportunity. And I think all of us should focus our minds on how we can bring that about so that society benefits from the power of this knowledge which is now reaching out to everyone in the world. I think society should invest in these nature-based or ecosystem-based responses for a number of reasons. Firstly, because this would ensure that we restore some of the damage that has taken place to a number of these ecosystems. I mean, I can give you the example of mangroves, for instance, which have been destroyed in several parts of the world. Now, these mangroves in coastal areas are nature's way of defending us against any kind of sea level related damage that could take place to societies, to infrastructure, and so on. So they are really nature's barrier to events related to the sea, which can cause a lot of damage. That's one reason. And the other reason is these are also extremely cost effective. And they also have a minimal amount of impact on the environment. Because, let's say you were to construct a dike or a wall against the threat of the sea damaging some coastal areas. That clearly has it's ugly to start with. And it also has major implications on the natural ecosystems over there. So I think there's a number of benefits that you can count, including monetary benefits, which clearly indicate that we have to adopt such an approach. This is by far the most eco-friendly, the most cost-effective, and I would say even in terms of sheer pleasure of looking at greenery, there would be a number of benefits from adopting this approach. And I'm giving the example only of coastal areas, but in many parts of the world, you could, for instance, if you look at our mountain slopes, if there is massive deforestation, then clearly every time you have an extreme event like a heavy precipitation event, you'll get a massive amount of silting that takes place. And often you'll have mudslides and so on, which can cause major damage. So the most sensible thing to do in preparation is to see that you bring about afforestation of some of these slopes, which has just a multiplicity of benefits.